Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar regarding the public consultation on updates to the accountability framework. We're going to wait another minute or two, and then we'll get started. Okay, we have a lot of people already here. We have a few more trickling in. It's 1 minute after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Jeff Milder. I'm the director of the Accountability Framework Initiative, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Daniela Palma and Alana Rivord from the AFI Backbone team. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today for this webinar on the public consultation regarding framework updates to the accountability framework. This session is being recorded, and also we will provide access to the slides afterwards via our website. So if you didn't catch something, not to worry, it will be available afterwards. We also invite you, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, to use the Q&A box in your Zoom functionality. Feel free to already enter questions as the presentation is going on, and toward the end of the session, we have a bit of time to answer your questions. So the plan for today is first, I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the Accountability Framework Initiative, the AFI, as well as generally the process that we're following to update the accountability framework. The bulk of the time will then be focused on covering the 11 different topics that are included in the public consultation, and we'll go into a bit of detail on each of those. And then we'll save about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So, of course, agriculture and forestry are essential sources of raw materials, economic development, and livelihoods for millions and millions of people. But unfortunately, current models of production and trade all too often are driving severe negative impacts. For instance, deforestation, conversion of other natural ecosystems, and associated greenhouse gas emissions, as well as human rights violations affecting indigenous peoples, workers, and others. The Accountability Framework Initiative, the AFI, is a collaborative program to make responsible supply chains the new normal in the agriculture, food, and forest product sectors. And we do this by helping to address gaps in ambition, in implementation, in monitoring, and in accountability in order to bring about this new normal of responsible supply chains. At the heart of the AFI is a coalition of 23 civil society organizations. We work together to build consensus about the elements of responsible supply chains, and then to put this understanding into practice as broadly as possible, working with companies, other partners, and other stakeholders. Our main product is the Accountability Framework, which serves as a practical roadmap for responsible supply chains. The framework is a common global reference that applies to all agricultural and forestry commodities that pose risks to the environment and human rights. It covers the entire value chain from production to retail as well as finance, and it focuses on the topics of deforestation and conversion, as well as human rights, with strong relevance for related topics such as greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity, and nature tied to the land sector. The framework addresses each element of company action required to establish responsible supply chains. This begins with setting goals and then embedding these goals in company systems and practices. It includes the management of supply chains, both at the production level and through procurement and sourcing. It addresses collaboration between companies and other stakeholders, for instance, through landscape initiatives. And finally, it includes monitoring, verification, and reporting of performance and progress. So put all together, the framework really serves as a management system or a due diligence system for responsible supply chains, providing detail on each of the different elements. All of the guidance that we put out is available for free on our website, and it can be used modularly by companies at any stage of their journey. So since it was published about 5 years ago, the accountability framework has been used widely to help improve policies, action, and assessment of responsible supply chains. So it's been used directly by hundreds of companies across the value chain, as well as financial institutions. And it's also been used to support a range of other initiatives across the enabling environment to develop strong and aligned policies, guidelines, and tools. So examples of this include industry and sector guidelines for commodities such as soy, cattle, and rubber, various monitoring tools and systems, reporting and disclosure standards and systems, including some of the main ones in this space, such as the Global Reporting Initiative and CDP, as well as public policy. So taken all together, our work really serves not only to strengthen, but also to help align all of the different actions that need to come together in order to achieve this broad transformation towards responsible supply chains. So with that background in mind, now I'd like to shift and provide a brief overview of the scope and process for updating the accountability framework. Since the framework was first published 5 years ago, of course, much has changed in the world. And so responding to these changes, we're in the process of updating the framework so that it continues to serve as the premier global reference for responsible supply chains. This slide shows an overview of the different documents that comprise the accountability framework. And as you can see in the right column, we've already updated a few of these documents, including the core principles, which is the fundamental high-level presentation of the accountability framework. We've updated the associated definitions, as well as a couple of the operational guidance documents, which present more detailed information about the different topics that we cover. This consultation focuses on the two sets of documents shown in green here, including updates to our materials on supply chain management, monitoring, and verification, as well as the development of some new guidance on closely related topics. Also this year, we will be developing some lighter touch updates to other operational guidance documents shown in yellow, and then the remaining sections of the accountability framework will be updated beginning later this year and into next year. And until then, the 2020 versions of those documents remain the current ones. So a bit more about our approach to developing these updates and to the public consultation. With the updates, we aim really to strengthen the guidance to reflect learning and innovation from recent years, and also to make sure that the framework is addressing the current issues and challenges that companies and others are facing and that may impede progress. We're also looking for the framework to become more strongly linked to recent and emerging regulation, mandates, and trends. For instance, new regulation in the European Union and other jurisdictions, climate and nature frameworks, and mandatory disclosure requirements, as well as improving the overall user friendliness of the accountability framework based on user feedback. To do this, we've convened working groups and conducted research into all of the topics. We're running, of course, this public consultation process, as well as other consultations with interested groups of stakeholders. And before the final documents are published, they'll be reviewed and approved by our coalition. And that's what helps ensure that the accountability framework continues to reflect the consensus of the broad civil society coalition that's behind it. I also want to emphasize that the updates are expected to build on the current framework, so keeping in place all of the main positions and recommendations while adding additional detail, clarity, and up-to-date information where needed. So for the many companies and others who have relied on the framework to help understand these issues and to act with confidence, please rest assured that this will still be the case and you can rely on this continuity going forward. So with that introduction behind us, now I'd like to move into a presentation of the topics covered in the public consultation. In the interest of time, I'll provide only brief summaries on each of the topics to give you a sense of what's covered and invite you to take a look at the consultation brief for the full coverage of each of these topics. So there's 11 topics altogether. We've grouped these into 4 themes. I'll be speaking to the first set of topics here and then passing to my colleague Daniela to cover the next 4 and then back to me to finish things off. The first set of topics addresses supply chain assessment, traceability, and control. This refers to the processes that commodity buyers use to understand the origins and compliance status of materials in their supply chains. And this, of course, is a central function and expectation for responsible supply chains. When buyers purchase directly from producers, such as farmers, they're in a good position to trace and control products to the production unit of origin through their direct commercial relationship with the producer. For all buyers downstream of the first buyer, the accountability framework says that traceability and control can be achieved through any of the 4 methods shown here. These include traceability and control directly to the production unit, traceability and control to a sourcing area, such as a landscape or the area around a first point of aggregation, use of certification, as well as the use of supplier control systems. However, for each of these 4 methods, the method must be suitably rigorous and fit for purpose in order to fulfill the traceability and control expectations. So with the updates, our aim is to provide more detail on the effective use of each method, as well as criteria to help assess when each method is suitable for meeting the traceability and control needs identified in the framework. The first method is traceability and control directly to the production unit of origin. A production unit is defined as the basic economic unit of production. So this could be a plantation, farm, ranch, or forest management unit. It includes all of the plots of land that are used for agriculture and forestry production, as well as any associated infrastructure, conservation areas, and other lands that are under one common management, located in the same general area, and sharing the same means of production. The accountability framework currently recommends that compliance be assessed at the level of the entire production unit, and this position will be retained and emphasized in the updated guidance. So with reference to the diagram shown on the slide here, the area outlined in white is an example of a production unit, a farm, consisting of 3 plots of land. So the recommendation is that compliance be assessed at the level of the whole farm. In the case of this diagram, plot number 2 is actively undergoing deforestation. So the farm as a whole, therefore, is non-compliant with the no deforestation policy, as are all the products that come from it. So the updated guidance will clarify that commodity buyers should use this whole farm approach for assessing compliance and ask their suppliers to do the same. It will also clarify the alignment of this recommended approach with other laws or monitoring approaches that might allow or call for assessment at a finer scale, for instance, at an individual plot or field within a farm, as is the case within the EU deforestation regulation. So our recommendation is compatible with the EUDR, but in the interest of making sure that commodity buyers don't risk designating as compliant material from farms with active deforestation or other non-compliances, we emphasize the whole farm approach. The second method for traceability and control is doing so at the area level. The area could be a landscape, a jurisdiction, or the sourcing area or supply shed around, for instance, a processing mill or other first point of aggregation. The accountability framework currently says that when when buyers are able to trace materials back to an area that overall is compliant, then all products from within that area also can be deemed compliant. This approach can help improve efficiency for buyers and also potentially provide incentives for landscapes and jurisdictions to be more sustainable overall. But some stakeholders have raised concern that if this is not done in a robust way, then it can also allow for non-compliance and lack of control of risks on the ground. In order to help address these concerns, the proposed updates provide more detail on when it's appropriate to use area-level traceability and control, as well as some of the characteristics that would make this approach suitable in any given case. So first, the updated guidance will provide a set of principles for ensuring appropriate use of this method. For example, if a company is using an area level method to assess one particular issue or risk, such as deforestation, it should make sure that it has complementary mechanisms to address all other relevant environmental, social, and legality risks. It's also important that area level approaches not only look at what's happened in the past, whether there's been, for instance, deforestation in the past, but also include an element of ongoing monitoring and response in order to make sure that problems don't persist or crop up in the future. The updated guidance also seeks to provide more detail on methods for credible area level monitoring and control on topics such as time frame, spatial resolution, and homogeneity of the area that's being assessed. You can find further detail on these points within the consultation brief. And finally, even where area level methods are suitable and helpful for assessing compliance with certain issues, there are still benefits to companies pursuing further traceability, for instance, to help strengthen their relationships and opportunities for engagement and support with their suppliers. The third method for traceability and control is the use of certification. Certification has been widely used for years to support responsible sourcing, but recently there's been growing interest in using certification for additional purposes, such as demonstrating regulatory compliance and supporting sustainability reporting. This has raised new questions about the applications and functions of certification, and the updates to the accountability framework aim to help address these questions that many stakeholders have. Unlike the other topics, which are elaborated only in the consultation brief, for this topic, we also have already developed a full working draft of a guidance document. You can access this full working draft from our website or from the link embedded within the public consultation brief. As part of the consultation process, we invite you to comment on the full working draft if you'd like to do that, or you can just review the synopsis of it that you can find in the consultation brief. So the working draft certification guidance includes several components. First, it provides guidance on how companies and others can assess the features and functions of any given certification program, considering its production level standard, chain of custody system, so that's the mechanism by which products are controlled and monitored as they move from origin to downstream buyers and purchasers. And then finally, the system's requirements for credibility and rigor, including the assurance system. The guidance provides a first level differentiation between models of physical chain of custody, where products with specific attributes can have continuity and can be tracked from origin through to final purchase, versus non-physical chain of custody, such as mass balance systems, where the materials in the downstream stages of the supply chain are not necessarily linked to specific sources of origin. Where certification provides physical chain of custody, it may be used to support demonstration of product volume compliance, performance, and due diligence, provided that other elements of the certification program are sufficiently robust, as explained in the guidance. The guidance also provides additional detail on what companies might want to do if they're using non-physical certification with non-physical chain of custody, such as mass balance, which might not fully fulfill their need to demonstrate product volume compliance, but can still serve other functions and may be able to be supplemented in different ways in order for companies to provide wraparound coverage of the functions they're looking to fulfill. The updated guidance on certification also includes recommendations for reporting on compliance status of certified materials, as well as a decision tree for selecting uses and functions of certification. So we invite you to review the additional detail on this material in either the consultation brief or the full working draft. The fourth and final method for traceability and control is the use of supplier control systems. These are defined as a supplier systems for traceability, monitoring, and control to assess and manage the origins and compliance of materials in their supply chain and to furnish this information to buyers. Supplier control systems are an essential mechanism, especially in longer supply chains, where downstream buyers might not be able to have direct visibility and control of production units at origin, so they rely on their suppliers to help meet this need. This approach is also embedded into the EU deforestation regulation, which recognizes so-called operators as the intermediary supply chain actors that put products on the EU market, and in doing so play a central role in providing control back upstream and furnishing this information onward to their buyers. The accountability framework already provides guidance to buyers on how to assess and understand the adequacy of suppliers' control systems and pursue supplemental measures or help close gaps if necessary. It also emphasizes that supplier control systems must cascade upstream in the event that there are multiple links between a buyer and the ultimate source of production on the ground. With the updates, we're looking to provide additional specificity about the elements of an effective supplier control system and how buyers can assess these. So the guidance provides a set of criteria that could be used, for instance, as an assessment checklist or other protocol to help assess and improve supplier control systems, covering elements such as the supplier's procurement policies, traceability systems, policies, supplier requirements, controls for chain of custody and volume reconciliation, verification, documentation, and record keeping. You can find the full list in the consultation brief. And the guidance also clarifies that suppliers themselves can make use of any of the other three mechanisms for traceability and control that I've just presented. So that concludes the first batch of topics, and now I'd like to pass over to Daniela to continue.
Thanks, Jeff. Great. So I'll be covering the next set of topics surrounding supply chain management, which describes the actions that commodity buyers take to ensure that the materials they source are compliant with their goals, commitments, and other obligations. This includes how they manage relationships with their suppliers, as well as criteria for purchasing and decision-making regarding performance and compliance. This consultation covers these 4 key topics you see listed here that specifically cover supply chain management. I'll walk you through each of these topics and the proposed updates that aim to refine and strengthen these parts of the accountability framework. So let's get started first with topic 5, responsible procurement. This involves commodity buyers establishing effective systems to ensure that their purchasing practices align with their environmental and social commitments and obligations. Companies can do so using instruments such as sourcing policies, contracts, or supplier codes of conduct. These should be applied to sourcing practices across the entire business. So based on this current structure of the AFI guidance, our updates look to build on this current structure and emphasize that the importance of embedding responsible practices from the very beginning when assessing and initiating new supplier relationships. This includes buyers setting minimum criteria for new suppliers that align with the buyer's own commitments and obligations on key issues like deforestation, conversion, and human rights. When screening for new suppliers, it's also important to assess the supplier's current performance on these topics, as well as its policies and practices for managing these issues and risks going forward. So additionally, we also look to update to the updates to provide more detail on the use of purchase control systems. Purchase control systems here consist of protocols and checks within the procurement process to determine compliance of each batch of product relative to the buyer's requirements. Purchase control systems should also cover all product purchases, including those from established suppliers, as well as spot markets and other one-off purchases. This helps to ensure that all sourcing adheres to environmental and human rights commitments and requirements. Finally, the updates also will work on providing greater detail on controlling for compliance when purchasing on spot markets, for example, through the use of approved supplier list or blacklist to support real-time purchasing decisions. And then moving to topic 6, determining appropriate responses to non-compliance. The accountability framework currently states within this topic that companies should have processes in place and systems to quickly and effectively identify and address non-compliance without enabling or promoting further non-compliance. The framework recommends that companies consider multiple factors when determining the appropriate response to non-compliance. This includes severity and effects of the noncompliance on people and the environment, culpability of the producers or suppliers, and supplier commitment to mitigate risk and improve responsible sourcing. The framework advises that companies take an inclusive approach to supply chain management. This means instead of immediately excluding any non-compliant suppliers, it is usually better to engage them, offering support to help them improve. Doing so is often the best way to help drive improvement while also avoiding harms to potentially vulnerable people, such as smallholder farmers and workers. Finally, all responses to noncompliance should be documented in specific time-bound plans with monitoring and follow-up as well to support from the buyers as needed. Great. Based on the current AFI guidance, the proposed updates focus on providing more nuance and actionable guidance based on where the supplier sits in the supply chain. So the updates address three specific scenarios that you see listed here. First, when buyers purchase directly from production units with non-compliance, there is usually a higher expectation for the supplier to cease non-compliance and take prompt corrective measures, such as restoring areas with post-cutoff date deforestation. Second, when buyers purchase from compliant production units, but the producer has non-compliance in other operations, the buyer should not turn a blind eye to these adverse impacts and non-compliance on these operations, especially if they're severe. However, it may be appropriate for the buyer to continue purchasing as long as the producer does not continue to engage in significant non-compliance. And then finally, when purchasing from suppliers downstream of producers, such as traders or manufacturers, there's more of a focus on improvement in both practices and performance across the supplier's full supply base. This includes furnishing information to the buyer so that they can monitor gaps and improvement. Under all of these scenarios, if buyers continue purchasing from suppliers with non-compliance, there should be specific time-bound improvement plans that they monitor to assess whether adequate progress is being made. This can also support decision-making about the potential need to suspend or exclude suppliers considering risk and benefits of various options, and may be warranted if suppliers have persistently low performance or demonstrate unwillingness to improve. And finally, it can also help companies explain these decisions to their stakeholders. Great. So next, talk about pathway back to compliance. Resolving noncompliance is a priority, but it hasn't always been very clear how suppliers may return to compliance, especially when it comes to an issue like deforestation and conversion. The accountability framework currently addresses this topic by offering specific guidance to remedy noncompliance related to deforestation and human rights violations. Each of these is addressed in its own operation guidance document, which you saw listed at the beginning of the presentation. Our proposed updates build on this initial guidance by providing three criteria for a production unit to return back to compliance following deforestation or conversion that occurred after the applicable cutoff date. First, so with that, we have three specific criteria that we've included as part of the pathways back to compliance. First, there is eligibility. To be eligible to return to compliance, the supplier must not be engaged in systemic or ongoing noncompliance anywhere in its business. This includes other holdings beyond the ones that the buyer is interested in purchasing from. Second, having sufficient actions must be underway. First, for example, by restoring or compensating for the deforestation or conversion that occurred, by monitoring progress towards full compliance, and by preventing future noncompliance through new policies or practices. The accountability framework already provides detail on each of these in the existing operational guidance on environmental restoration and compensation. And third, there must be sufficient progress towards reattaining compliance as outlined in the consultation brief. This doesn't require ecosystems to be fully restored, but rather key steps that demonstrate that this is in progress. The proposed material also suggests how buyers can report production units or supply chain volumes as compliant based on the preceding points. And then last but not least, we have responsible disengagement, the last topic in supply chain management. While the accountability framework prioritizes supplier engagement and improvement, it also recognizes that supplier exclusion might be necessary when a supplier is persistently unwilling or unable to prevent and address adverse impacts and noncompliance. If not done sensitively and correctly, however, the supplier exclusion can result in further harms to people and ecosystems. To help address this risk, the updated guidance will include new material on responsible disengagement in cases when it's necessary to discontinue a supplier relationship. This new material closely follows relevant points in internationally recognized business guidelines, including the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises on Responsible Business Conduct. Prior to terminating a supplier relationship, the buyer should pursue steps to address noncompliance. For instance, it can take measures to increase its leverage over the supplier or provide direct support for improvement. If these measures, however, are not effective, then the buyer must determine and communicate the scope and rationale for the supplier exclusion. The buyer should also take measures to avoid or mitigate any harms from the termination. This can include providing sufficient notice of termination, supporting the rights and livelihoods of workers and smallholders, for instance, through transition processes, and engaging in broader system solutions. And with that, I conclude the topics on supply chain management, and I'll pass it back to you, Jeff, to continue with the remaining topics.
Great. Thanks very much, Daniela. So we're in the home stretch here, covering just the last three topics. The first of these is verification. Verification is a growing expectation in supply chains due to regulations as well as stakeholder expectations, but it hasn't always been clear exactly when, how much, or what types of verification are necessary or appropriate. The accountability framework already provides a section on verification as well as a guidance document on this that outlines characteristics of credible and effective first, second, and third-party verification. You can see some of those summarized on the screen here. It also provides additional good practices specifically for third-party verification when this is necessary. The updates seek to provide more clarity about the forms and attributes of verification that are required to fulfill different needs and use cases. So first, it aims to provide clarity by differentiating uses of verification for internal management and decision-making. For instance, regular social auditing might be done in a manufacturing context to detect and address workers' rights issues. Versus verification that serves an external validation function where a company wishes to demonstrate and validate that specific compliance or performance levels have been achieved. External validation functions are further broken down into 4 use cases, and the updates will outline parameters for each of these. Again, the goal really is to clarify which forms of verification are suitable and appropriate in each of these contexts. So the first use case is around fulfilling regulations that require assurance of sustainability disclosure, for instance, as we see in the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The second use case is to substantiate claims having to do with specific product volumes or products, such as products on the supermarket shelf. The third is to substantiate public-facing reporting that might apply to a whole supply chain or a whole business. And the fourth is to verify the adequacy of supply chain due diligence, whether that's based on a regulatory requirement or the expectation of a business partner or financial institution. Next, the updated guidance looks to provide more clarity about the scope of verification. So what things actually need to be verified in order to demonstrate attributes or compliance at a specific scope or scale. So for instance, if the aim is to verify compliance or performance of specific product volumes, then this requires both verification of the traceability and chain of custody system, making sure that the products that have a particular validated result or claim are indeed originating from the places that they're stated to come from, as well as verifying compliance or performance at the point of origin, such as the farm or forest management unit of origin. The second level is a supply chain level. So this is verification of aggregate compliance or performance across multiple sources, requires information verification of the product volume level, as well as the systems and controls that the company has for managing the supply chain as a whole. And then finally, for verification of company level data, for instance, in sustainability disclosures, that requires looking at how product and supply chain data are aggregated and controlled, as well as company-wide controls, for instance, pertaining to governance and financial data. Finally, the topic of verified deforestation and conversion free, or VDCF products. There's been growing interest in this lately, as well as a proliferation of different VDCF guidelines and methodologies. Given this proliferation, one of the goals of the guidance is to provide a generalized and standardized set of parameters for VDCF that can be applied across different sectors and contexts to create some harmonization in how companies and other stakeholders approach this need. Topics 10 and 11 address company targets and progress trajectories toward reaching those targets. And these updates aim specifically to address some of the challenges and ambiguities that companies have as they approach some of the more difficult segments of their supply chains, and also as they think ahead toward whether their targets and commitments are being met, and if not, what they should do about that. So topic 10 has to do with improvement pathways for difficult to trace product volumes. Companies often face challenges in managing parts of their supply chain due to two sets of challenges. So upstream in the supply chain, they may face challenges having to do with multiple tiers or levels of indirect suppliers, for instance, in the cattle sector, as well as, for instance, informal local trade or other sources of informality close to origin that make it difficult to know where materials come from. Companies also face challenges downstream in the supply chain, for instance, when purchasing derivatives from soy or palm oil, materials may have passed through multiple processing stages with a high degree of mixing. And also commodities may be embedded in animal feed and animal products that companies buy for instance, meat or dairy products. The accountability framework already provides guidance on improving traceability and control for indirect suppliers and smallholders, but it doesn't provide guidance specifically on derivatives and embedded volumes. So with the updates to the accountability framework, we're looking to fill this gap. And so first, the updated guidance will provide new definitions for derivatives, embedded commodity volumes, and other product categories, and reinforce that company responsible sourcing commitments and strategies should include and address all of these forms of products and not exclude derivatives or embedded volumes, even though they may be a bit more complicated to manage. It then suggests that where companies have insufficient traceability and control for these types of product materials, that they should pursue both of the following interventions. So the first are improvement measures to improve the level of traceability and control for these products. This often entails working with supply chain intermediaries such as animal feed manufacturers and manufacturers of oleochemicals derived from products such as palm oil in order to conduct additional monitoring, auditing, assessment, or control at these intermediary stages. This can be done individually or through industry-level initiatives, as in many times multiple downstream buyers rely on the same group of upstream suppliers. Additionally, where companies don't fully know the origin of materials in their supply chain, they should take actions or make investments to address environmental and human rights issues at the supply base level, even if they don't know exactly where all of their products come from. This can be done, for instance, through landscape or sectoral initiatives, smallholder support programs, or certification book and claim credits. So even though it's desirable where possible for a company to direct investment to its actual sourcing areas, where it doesn't know exactly where all materials come from, it should still invest in addressing risks and impacts at origin as if it did have full traceability. Finally, the updates will add additional guidance on the mechanics of assessment, accounting, and reporting for derivatives and embedded volumes. And now moving on to the final topic having to do with target dates and fulfillment of targets. So the context here is that many companies have set responsible supply chain goals, many of them with specific time-bound targets, including, in some cases, no deforestation by 2025. Progress toward these goals varies. Not all of them are probably on track to being met. And at the same time, there's other companies that have not set goals at all. So as we approach this situation, it will be important in 2025 and beyond in order to maintain ambition, sustain achievements made to date, while fostering further progress and facilitating accountability. On this topic of targets, the accountability framework currently calls on companies to set ambitious time-bound commitments across their entire business. It also recommends that commitments on deforestation and conversion set a specific target date, which is defined as the date by which a company intends to have fully implemented its policy or commitment. And the AFI also provides standardized metrics already to help clarify and standardize how progress is tracked across issues such as exposure, risk, actions, and performance. So moving on to our updates, if I can get my mouse to work here. The updated guidance aims to address some of the most prominent stakeholder questions about target dates and fulfillment of targets, as well as to provide clear pathways for sustained action post-2025. So first is to provide more clarity on what it means to fulfill a commitment or to fulfill a commitment by a given target date, such as 2025. This can be said to have been accomplished when all or nearly all of the materials in a company's supply chain comply with its commitments, and the company has effective systems in place to prevent and avoid noncompliance, monitor its supply base, and respond as needed. It's important to emphasize that fulfillment of a commitment is not a one-time achievement. It requires ongoing management and vigilance in order to continue to address the environmental and human rights issues in the context of the company's dynamic business. Just a clarification on the language, all or nearly all materials in the company's supply chain. The reason for this nuance makes reference back to what Daniela and I were saying earlier regarding company management of noncompliance and when it might be appropriate for a company to continue purchasing materials where there is noncompliance. For instance, a company may purchase from smallholders that are not fully compliant in the interest of smallholder inclusion and livelihood improvements, and they may continue purchasing from non-compliant suppliers that are engaged in active improvement processes. Companies often, over time, also may take on new suppliers. They may acquire new business units through mergers and acquisitions. And in both cases, they may take on new sources of noncompliance that need to be actively addressed. So this dynamism needs to be recognized, and companies need to be able to move forward and continue to provide solutions in those contexts. The updated guidance will also provide additional information on post-2025 pathways, both for companies that may have set targets but not fully achieved them, as well as for companies that have not yet set goals, and we encourage them to do so. So in the past, we've seen a lot of emphasis on long-term targets, often with round dates such as 2020, 2025, 2030. The updated guidance will emphasize that it's important to supplement these longer-term goals with short-term improvement plans and targets, for instance, on a 1 to 2 year rolling basis. This makes sure that companies are taking sustained and concerted actions, and also that they're able to be recognized and identified for the progress they're making on a year-to-year basis. In this vein, the guidance also emphasizes the importance of disclosing annually in line with AFI guidelines and metrics. The AFI already provides many of these metrics that are oriented around companies reporting on 100% of source volumes, both for compliance and for traceability. And this is really helpful to understand the scope of progress as well as any gaps. Adding to this is the recommendation that the company also disclose management responses and timelines for all volumes that are not currently known to be compliant. So that concludes my run through of the 11 topics. I recognize it was a lot of information, so appreciate your patience and willingness to engage with these topics. We hope the presentation has sparked your interest in delving into the consultation brief and sharing your input. So before moving into the Q&A, I'd just like to take a moment to explain how you can do this. Everything you need can be found on our consultation webpage, which you may access through the QR code on your screen or just by visiting our website, and you can't miss the link to the public consultation. So we invite you to read the full consultation brief, or if you prefer, to focus on just those topics that especially interest you. Each topic is covered in about 2 to 3 pages of material in the consultation brief. Once you've done that, we invite you to provide your input via the online survey. For each topic, we pose a couple questions that you're welcome to answer, as well as provide any additional input that you might have. And again, you're welcome to fill the survey for as many or as few topics as you like. Just to emphasize, your input here is extremely valuable. It will certainly inform how these updates are further developed and finalized. We aim for the accountability framework to address real-world context, challenges, and solutions from across the value chain and around the world. So your experiences, ideas, and comments are extremely helpful. So with that, let's move on to our Q&A session. And Alana is joining us here. She's been monitoring the Q&A and will be posing some of the questions that you all have asked, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Thanks very much, Jeff. A couple of some sort of process questions to start with. We've had a question about those technical working groups that you mentioned, a desire for a little bit more detail on which topics benefited from a technical working group and the sorts of stakeholders that were engaged through those, please.
Great, thanks for the question. So there's been multiple sources of input in the development of the material in the consultation brief to date. A lot of the detail work is done by members of our coalition. The technical working groups have also included some service providers that work with companies on the development of solutions in different forest risk commodities. Additionally to the working groups, much of the material in terms of both the ideas, but also the topics that really address the questions that companies and other stakeholders have come from the direct feedback we've received over the past couple of years, which we manage and track on an ongoing basis. So we've really tried to speak to the issues and comments that most people have, as well as to the solutions that companies and others are developing to help address these.
Next question, in relation to topic 4 on supplier control systems, there was a question on how, if at all, the AFI has considered the elements of ISO 9001 certification, which is on broader guidance on quality management systems. Was that used at all in developing this proposed guidance?
No, we haven't. We haven't looked at ISO 9001, but thank you for the suggestion, and we will take a look at that as we're further developing out that topic.
And then a sort of a scenario question on what sort of guidance is offered for companies that may be sourcing from a supplier that is compliant with the company's policies in regard to the area and the commodity that company is sourcing, but there may be known that that supplier could have deforestation, conversion, or human rights abuses in other commodity supply chains or other areas. What, if any, guidance is offered for what companies should do in a situation like that?
That's a good question. We receive that quite a bit, and I think it's probably important to recognize that there's a spectrum of scenarios that could be considered here. So what we generally say is that when there's a clear relationship or nexus between the commodity and context that a company is sourcing from and any harms or non-compliances that might be going on in related portions of the supplier's business, that those should certainly be considered. So as we know, for instance, there's often a relationship between logging and the subsequent development of palm oil in contexts such as Southeast Asia. There may be a tight linkage between the development of cattle pastures and the subsequent conversion into soy production. So those are close relationships. So proximity by commodity type, by geography, and also by ownership are all indications that the buyer should be paying attention to adjacent portions of a company's business. at the other end of the spectrum, of course, there are, for instance, large multinational traders whose businesses in different commodities like cocoa and soy are completely separate. They're in different continents and so forth. And so at some point, the ability of buyers to influence those very disparate contexts becomes very attenuated. And so we do recognize that reality, but I think there's many scenarios where it's important for buyers to be attentive to those adjacent issues. And that's something that we already cover in the accountability framework, and we'll be looking to provide some additional parameters and specificity around in the updates.
Just a reminder that folks can enter their questions in the Q&A. I've got one more here in the queue. If you've got a question, please type it in there so we can take it next after this question. And this question is regard to the use of the term significant non-compliance. We've got an ask for a bit more detail on what the threshold would be for significant non-compliance versus the all or nearly all phrasing that you described in topic 11.
Great. I'm not quite sure exactly which slide the question significant refers to, but what I will say as a general comment is that those types of details are ones on which we would especially invite stakeholder input. So I think the need here is to be able to provide some generalized parameters that can guide companies on what decisions to make in particular contexts, for them to feel like they have the ability to do so in an appropriate and justified way, and then to be transparent about why they've done that. We can't be prescriptive of every single scenario that might arise. The world is a vast place, but narrowing down on those parameters is really important. So we invite any of you that have specific ideas on that to highlight those. Let's see. So the commenter is speaking about topic 7. So now that I know that, let me go back and see if I can say a bit more about that.
Yeah. Maybe to add to that, Jeff, since one of the topics I'm covering, that is an area where we provide the 3 kind of areas of what you can assess, including the severity of the noncompliance, let me go back to that slide. Yeah, as you were saying, we have the severity, the culpability, and the supplier commitment to mitigate the risk and the non-compliance. So looking at these 3 factors kind of gives us that idea of how you should be assessing the non-compliance and be able to identify whether it's significant or not. But again, as Jeff mentioned, we are open, and this is one of the areas we would like to get hear from you and get more input on to determine whether there's a way to really define significant, and besides the 3 areas and factors that we've included here in our proposed updates. Jeff, anything else to add to that?
I think maybe that's as far down into that rabbit hole as you want to dive right now. But I think it's acknowledged that words like that can mean different things to different people, and so we really do invite what you think the parameters around that should be.
We've got a question around training materials. And so, Jen, if you could please share the link to our AFI e-learning platform with that asker. We do have an opportunity to train companies on the accountability frameworks and guidance through an interactive platform. So we'll share that with you. I'm not seeing any other questions, so last chance here. If not, I think Jeff will hand over to you to wrap up.
Maybe I'll just speak briefly to the question that was posed here about providing guidance for upstream suppliers, especially small and medium enterprises, on expectations around supplier control systems and responsible procurement. So yes, we have some training materials on that, but also acknowledging the challenge here that as downstream buyers are looking to gain greater control of their supply chains, then a lot of that burden gets shouldered by supply chain intermediaries who are often not as familiar with these topics and don't have the capacity to do it. So I think that's a really critical point. I think there's ways in which the accountability framework has been and can be sort of simplified and pulled apart into sets of actions, more streamlined sets of actions that are specific to those types of actors. And a lot of that work is often done by the downstream buyers that can do that upstream in their supply chain. All that being said, I think this is another place where the range of scenarios where this challenge manifests is quite varied. And we really welcome your input if you have any ideas, good examples you can point to, or how you think we can best address this need. So this is one where I think we don't have all the answers at the moment. We very much welcome your input. So great. Have we worked our way through the questions, Alana?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, let's move to wrap things up. So in concluding, I'd just like to thank everyone here for taking the time to join us and engaging with these topics. And also want to just remind folks the public consultation is open through March 14th. So we hope to hear from many of you after the close of the public consultation. We'll be working to produce the full-length documents and hope that all of you will continue to remain engaged. And thank you again for your time and have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.